The presentation today is How Drupal Works, a guide to the Drupal community. Just to be clear, this isn't going to have anything to do with code today. We're talking about the community that's behind Drupal and how to get involved, why you might want to get involved, and different ways of doing that.
Oh, these people have to say their word.
Oh, yeah.
We don't have opinions about the community.
We did, before we, the start of the session, we did a quick round about who you were, where you were from, and how you interact with the community. Just finished it, so you might as well go ahead and chime in.
Okay, I'll go. So I'm Kathy Fays. I'm a CT, and I interact with the community by going to events and mentoring and working on support.
All kinds of things, right?
I'm Travis Carden, and I interact with the community in the issue queues, patching and reviewing patches. I don't get onto IRC much anymore these days. I do individual mentorship in a team context, and I engage with my local area.
Jess?
I engage with the community by going to the Bay Area, Hampton, San Francisco, attending different events. I have much contributed modules I maintain. I was the core initiative lead for 2 years, and so kind of involved in core as well as all the contrib general bug. I come to events and I'm taking in.
I'm a contrib module author too. I didn't know that was an option.
A number of people who told us everything. We wouldn't have any time left. So we'll restart right now. Just for recording purposes again. We have How Drupal Works, Guide to the Drupal Community. Goal here is to really do kind of an introduction about a lot of the things I would have liked to have known when I first got to the community about really how decisions get made, how to get involved, where are the best points of contact, things like that. I hope to use a few examples of my own history in this talk because I'm a relative newcomer to the community compared to some other people in this room. I've only been involved in Drupal about 2 years. I had a long background in doing online facilitation and e-democracy type issues. I worked for an organization called e-democracy.org. I took a little detour and owned a Chinese restaurant for about a year. That didn't go so well, and that's what brought me to Drupal. So it was a nice opportunity. And so basically, yeah, what happened is I was kind of transitioning out of the e-democracy work. It really wasn't going very well. I was very passionate about it. I loved it. I learned a lot about it, but I never was really making a great living at it. This opportunity came up to take over this restaurant. I went for that. When that finished, it was kind of like, okay, I have to make another transition, and I started looking around. And I had some experience with Drupal in the past. I knew that some of my previous skills would translate well into web development and such. And I knew people in the local Drupal community. And I just started hanging out. Actually, probably my first deep involvement with the Drupal community was the Twin Cities Drupal Camp just 2 years ago. So, and more recently, I've partnered with a couple of local colleagues in the Twin Cities and formed a new Drupal company. So more specific, in these 2 years, the kinds of ways that I've been involved in the community, I'm an active user in the local Drupal users group. We've been on the planning committee now for 2 years. So for last year's camp, 2 years ago, my first camp, right after that camp, I started to get involved, found myself on the Twin Cities, they have kind of a happy hour every month. In addition, we have a monthly happy hour, a monthly user group meeting, a monthly coder meetup. And a lot of planning for the camp that year was the happy hour. And so if you just were coming to the happy hour, you sort of got absorbed into the Drupal Camp Planning Committee, which worked pretty well in that case. It got me involved. It wasn't long after I started getting involved that I wanted to do sprinting, and I just started organizing small sprints. It's like I get together a handful of people, and I did a couple of those in the Twin Cities area. Basically, just put a note on groups.drupal.org saying, "Does anyone want to get together and kind of sprint or work on stuff this weekend?" Something like that. They were usually very informal, very, we didn't set high expectations or goals, so it was easy to feel successful because if 5 people showed up and we coded for a few hours, we were happy. So my first DrupalCon was just in Austin. I'm planning to go to Amsterdam. I've been involved in some other stuff there. We'll talk more about that later. This is just a quick slide on our trip flow. And my two partners, we do website development, but also love working with freelancers, mentoring, training, things like that. We're all very involved in the community, very passionate about the community. And so we put a lot of emphasis on being involved in Drupal, and not just working with it. While we were talking about camp, a quick plug for our camp, Fox Valley. We have a camp in 3 weeks. It'll be a great camp. Pretty much similar format to this, training, 2 days of sessions, and a day of sprints. So $45 for everything. So which is kind of obvious to everybody, I guess, is that Drupal's an open source software, supporting building an open source community. As somebody, I was drawn into Drupal partly because I was interested in the community, because I was interested in how the community worked. This idea, I've been aware of it for a long time, worked alongside people working in open source communities, but it's never really failed to amaze me that this concept of open source works. It's very counterintuitive to a lot of things that we think about how things are supposed to work, right? That a bunch of people who are using a tool all for their independent business interests are all sort of collaborating in a fairly unstructured way, oftentimes without compensation, or competing with their competitors, to build the tool that they all use is unusual. I don't know if any of you have had to explain open source to like your parents or something. That's my dad will ask me over and over again about how this works. He just doesn't quite get it. So one of the things about this is a general slide, not about Drupal, and I think Jen used a slide like this the other day, is that there's this huge open source community that supports Drupal. It's a much smaller group of people that are sort of active in the community, and an even smaller portion that actually contribute to it. And that's obviously something we have to think about. And the key thing I want to get at is how to make it work for those people. So the next thing I want to think about, one of the questions that comes up to me a lot is thinking about Drupal in comparison to other open source projects. And we all use open source projects, probably other ones. In fact, in order to use Drupal, you almost have to use other open source projects. And I was thinking some names of open source projects that we use on a day-to-day basis. Go ahead. Apache. Anybody else? Firefox, Mozilla, right?
The whole lamp stack.
The whole lamp stack is all open source, right? So just to work on Drupal, we're using tools. And I think the point I was trying, I quickly came up with a bunch of these. And I could correct me if I've made any mistakes here. I listed one that probably nobody's heard of because it's an open source project that I worked with in my last job a lot. It's a community of about 15 people, I think, that really develop and support that project. But there's a lot of projects out there. They're very different. We use open source projects all the time that we don't contribute back to. So when we look at that previous chart, about 90% of the people don't necessarily are active and participate. That in itself isn't necessarily a problem. We can't all contribute or be active in every open source community. But for those of us that are working on this particular one, working on the Drupal, it's important that we understand, to think about how it is that we make that work. So really what I was just saying, so how is it that we make this work? And I'm going to quickly, because this is that isn't completely, it's taken me a while to sort of figure out. And I think there's the community, and then there's an overall, there's the decision-making structure about how decisions about the future of Drupal get made, decisions about code get made, and that interested me for a long time. And over time, I put together this sort of overall view about the overall Drupal governance. But then there's another part which we'll get to, which is the community itself. You hear this a lot, and I'm not even going to try and say his last name. Is a benevolent dictator for life. I mean, I want to have conversations with people later on about how Drupal compares to other communities. My understanding is that there are quite a few different models. There are models where there's sort of a committee that makes decisions about it. I think there are some that a particular company runs. I mean, some open source projects are really only open source to my knowledge, in the sense that anybody can sort of look at the code and can adapt it for their own use, but there is no official sort of channel to give back to the community. I mean, that's not, you can't assume that that's the way every open source project works. So we have, Dries, who founded and is the ultimate decision maker, and we're under the assumption, sort of the trust of the community, that he's making decisions that are in the best interest of the community and not necessarily in his own business interest. He's delegated authority, and this is something I've been gradually sort of watching and admiring, I guess, is the sense that that there's a lot of people that, well, Dries has this ultimate decision-making authority. A lot of other people are making decisions and exercising leadership in the community, and he seems to have done a pretty good job at delegating that. My understanding, I've not been involved in any discussions that Dries needed to step into, but my understanding is that's one of his roles. And near the top, they're having conflicting views that occasionally he has to get involved and help sort that out. We've got more recently, and this isn't comprehensive, but these are some of the things that I've run across. We've got a set of working groups in the Drupal community that, again, Dries has helped tackling various aspects of the community. We'll come back to that in just a second. There's this idea of a duocracy that Jen and Kate were talking about yesterday in the Drupal community. I've often heard of it in the Twin Cities community. People say you scratch your own itch. So we're all sort of there doing what interests us and doing what, taking what we need, and that's how things get done, is that if people feel a particular urge or a need and want to see something happen, they do it. There are some problems with that model, but it's the one that seems to be working pretty good for us so far. There's an idea about consensus, that decisions are made on a consensus basis in the Drupal community, and I've read some conflicting ideas about whether or not that's true. But I think what is true is, of the people working on a particular issue, there's at least an effort to make sure that people are in some sort of agreement before proceeding. A lot of time, not necessarily all the time. One of the things that leads to, side effect, is that sometimes it's very hard to get people together towards a consensus, and you'll see things, initiatives start and sort of get bogged down in that decision-making, that consensus-making process. It's like until we get enough people on the same page, it's hard to move forward. And I've seen that in a few examples of my own self. And then we have the Drupal Association, which really has nothing to do with organizing it's nothing to do with the decision-making about Drupal itself or the code, but helps manage the community in a way, helps manage the brand, the conventions, and things like that. So I wanted to just briefly touch on this working group because it's one of the more recent things that has come out of some discussions. Again, feedback on this stuff later, additional information. So Dries, I'm assuming in consultation with other people, set up a series of groups. And these seem to be the more active making decisions right now in the community. And I DrupalCon, that if we have a documentation team, I know somebody on that group who's working at how to improve documentation. And really, I think at this stage, they've spent a lot of time just figuring out what is it we're going to be doing at this as a group, and they haven't really even dug deep into the issue yet. But we have Dave, who's on the security team. Is this the same security team that existed before, in a sense, or is there a new group that?
So there's something new that I don't entirely understand how they relate to each other. It might just be a new name around the same thing. I'm a very recent addition to the
Are you?
security team. Does
Okay.
anyone else here know about?
Well, I think it's not critical to this discussion. Part of why I put this up is because there's a community working group, and I just thought it was interesting to put up sort of the mission and the basic statement of what that group is doing, because it reflects some of the thought that's going into the Drupal community about community. So I'm just going to read this out loud. The mission of the community working group is to uphold the Drupal's code of conduct in order to maintain a friendly and welcoming community for the Drupal project. The CWG acts as a group to maintain documentation and processes focused on the health of the community. In case of disagreements, they guide community members through the conflict resolution process in an effort to help diffuse tense situations, and keep discussions productive. In rare cases of intractable conflicts, they act as a point of escalation, mediation, and/or final arbitration for the Drupal community. I have the sense that a lot of the Drupal code of conduct is fairly new. There's a fairly new conflict resolution process. I have the feeling that the Drupal community is somewhat unique in the fact that we've been willing and spending time looking at things like inclusion and looking at things like codes of conduct. I think there are other open source communities doing that, but I don't think it's necessarily an assumption that everyone is, and there's actually a lot of discussion about that out there right now. To me, there's the old saying that people often said, "Come to Drupal for the code and stay for the community." I was recruited to Drupal by a bit by a friend, Barry Medor, some of you may know, who often told me he came for the community and stayed for the code. And to some extent, I feel the same way. And part of it is having a background in sort of organizing and e-democracy and things like that. I wasn't really a coder. I'm still really a coder. So, you know, I was very much drawn to Drupal because it had this community around it that I could be a part of, and that seemed to be addressing the kinds of issues and things that I care about. So, talk about the community a little bit. These are just some slides that represent sort of my experience as a community. Anybody at DrupalCon Austin here might know about that. The other pictures are all from, this is our local Drupal camp in the Twin Cities. This is an open house we did back in February. And that's a cake somebody made for the open house. But this goes back to that part about, you know, coming for the community. I mean, there's a lot of value in Drupal in the community itself and in these kinds of events and in this kind of atmosphere, I guess, and working in it. So what is the Drupal community? These are some of the points of contact I was asking you earlier about where you connect with the Drupal community. These are some of the ways that, a few of the many, there's more ways, of course, than this. Local user groups and meetups, I've gotten very involved in those. Yeah, like I did at least 2, probably 3 user group type things a month in the cities alone. Camps and cons, I got to my first con this year. I'm going to a few camps. Well, I've been to a total of probably 3 camps up until now. I'll be at 3 in the next month. Yeah. Sure. Convention, I'm sorry. So like DrupalCon, Drupal.
Like DHS, PhD, that's a word right there. Right.
No, and that's easy. If you have any questions, this is supposed to be a beginner session, and trying not to assume any knowledge. Drupal has well at least 3, if not 4 now, regional world global conventions. Up until about a year ago, I think it was North American European Convention, and they've recently did like a Asian, or they called it, but they had one in Australia. Yeah, and that's supposed to be kind of this isn't supposed to be on the scale of like Drupal Europe, but there now they're going to do a the first time in February, I think, or January, February. So the conventions dramatically. I mean, they're having to do this partly. They've grown so much. We just had at Drupal in Austin, there were 3,500 people, roughly. So very big events. Hear from a lot of people that are getting too big, and that the camp really, it's a different experience because it's more intimate. Dave tweeted yesterday something about like it's going to be back at a camp. It's just so much more manageable. Lost it. So there's we got Drupal.org. Well, I shouldn't say obviously because a lot of this isn't obvious to beginners. Drupal.org, probably everybody's into, but you may not know how completely use it. I'll come back a little bit to that. We also have Drupal.org, which is a sort of community tool for Drupal, where if you want to be a local group, like the Twin Cities group, or a documentation group to deal with documentation, you can use Drupal.org. Might be a tool Drupal values have, so we use it. As somebody who did online facilitation and organizing in the past, I get very frustrated with it. There's a lot I'd like to be able to do that I have a hard time with. but that's what we IRC is involved in, especially contributing back to itself, code or core. You're going to want to IRC. That's where a lot of the discussion goes on. It's kind of old school chat. A little intimidating sometimes to first get involved in, and I wouldn't recommend everyone in this room running out and getting on IRC, but if you're really involved in that kind of contribution, you will. A lot of discussion if you connect with folks sort of about Drupal, a lot of discussion on Twitter. I found it a really good way to stay in touch with a lot of people between apps and stuff. Drupal.org has a forum for support. A lot of experienced folks moved from Drupal.org to Drupal Answers or other places to post questions and answer them. I found myself doing that a little bit unintentionally. I never consciously made the decision, like I'm not going to post Drupal.org anymore for my support questions. And I did get good answers on Drupal.org. So it's still a good place, especially at the very beginner level. But I've had the sense that as your questions get complicated, that you're more likely to get a good answer at the Drupal Answers. There is a Drupal community on Google. I'm sure there's one on there's probably one on Facebook as well. I just them, but there's a lot of places you can connect with other folks on Drupal and ask questions. One of the things I want to talk a little bit about is why to get involved. One of the interesting things about the community, for me, is the various reasons that people do get involved. There are some really obvious reasons why people get involved. Learn new skills, networking, job or business opportunities. Making connections, relationships becomes really important as you get more involved in Drupal. It's one of the things I like to emphasize is that and it's also it increases your value as a Drupal developer when you have connections to the community and you know where things are. Questions. It's surprising how often you run into folks who've been working with Drupal for a long time, but doing it on their own, and really they develop Drupal show, or you can see they're working a lot because they're not learning from other people. They don't have a good resource to get questions, where they can get questions answered. I mean, I kind of have at every Drupal meetup I go to, I walk into the door with one or two questions that are in the back that I've been waiting for the next meetup to ask somebody. And there's certain people in particular that I'm saving a question for when I next see them. And that having those sort of regular contacts with the community, it helps you develop and learn new skills. It also makes you a more valuable resource to your clients because you're able to draw upon that. Other things that if you're active in the community, there are places like Drupal.org or IRC or even Twitter. You could post a question. If he knows who you are, you're a lot less likely to get an answer. If you've been going to user group meetings and or answering other people's questions in these forums, you come back with your own question, and people are much more likely to respond. And it's obviously because it's, trying to be selective, but because people just sort of they're doing it on their own time off, and they're more likely to reply to people they have a relationship with. So there is this sense of just giving back. Some people come to the Drupal community because they feel like this is an open source tool that they're using, out of, and they have an obligation to give something back to it. There's some people who do it because it's fun, and I think that there's a part of the motivation to be part of something big. It's like, it's no longer just building individual websites for your clients, but it's about being something that's building this tool and advancing the feature in a way, and it's a bigger thing. I'm surprised in our Drupal group to see people that don't use Drupal at all in their day-to-day work, but just love Drupal and they build modules at night. They're maintainers on modules, do events, support, answer people's questions. They don't a benefit to them in their day-to-day job. There's other people who maybe did Drupal 3 or 4 years ago in our users group who moved on to a new job where they don't do Drupal at all. People coming to the Drupal meetups. I think it's, again, that In their case, maybe they came for the code and they're there for the community. At least one gentleman on our Drupal Camp planning committee, who I think hasn't touched Drupal. They worked for years. I don't know if he's using it at night, but he comes up, helps plan our camp, and seems to do that. So there's a lot of different reasons to get involved. So base. One of the things, there's going to be a sprint tomorrow. If you want to get involved in actually do this in a second, but if you want to get involved in stuff, there's that whole track, and a lot of attention is paid to that in the community, I think. Most of what I've been trying to do is talk about either similar or other things that we can do. There's a really basic thing in setting up an account for Drupal.org. It's a great way to just start to get yourself involved in the community. And if you're eventually going to post something, a question in the support forum, something you're going to do that. And it seems like fewer people are doing this. Mr. Jeff found these metric charts, and the chart that I see a lot is that a lot is accounts on Drupal.org, and it's going down substantially. And I don't know necessarily how bad of a thing it is, but it certainly doesn't seem like a good thing. Because
interesting to see how that corresponds to major releases.
It would be, and I would expect that on Drupal 8 you'll see some switches, whether they're positive or negative. will happen. But, so, and to use your Drupal.org profile, and I posted mine here. And I just wanted to point out a couple of things. One of the things, I'm not showing my entire Drupal profile. Down at the bottom, about all the projects you're involved in. So if you're involved in, if you're maintaining a module or something like that, that's all displayed there. I pulled them up, see on people's profiles. There's a lot of camps and events I've been at. This section here where you can list and acknowledge your mentors. I think that's a really valuable thing to do. There's people in this room that are on my list. Mentors. Three of them are in this room right now. So, any other points about that? I'm going to the next scene quick. One of the things I'm going to recommend is joining the Drupal Association, and some people in this probably noticed that. So I got to get on that. So I'm not yet. If you get the association, there's a little badge in the corner of your profile saying you're a member of the Drupal Association. So Drupal core mentoring, if you're interested in being involved in actually working with Drupal itself, developing Drupal 8 or even probably Drupal 7 too, there's some great ways to do it, one of which is obviously getting involved in Core Sprint tomorrow. We have Andrea and Kathy here who really are the two people here that put a lot of work into this and did a job and have been very influential in my own involvement in Drupal. At the first camp I went to, they had a sprint on the Sunday after the camp, and I was there all day Friday, most of the day Saturday. Absolutely sure that there was no reason for me to go to that sprint because I just didn't know enough or couldn't contribute. Jess, XJM, who used to do a lot more with core mentoring, got up and gave a speech at the end of the camp and hammered down, you don't have to know all this stuff. Be a coder. There's a lot of things that everybody can do. If you built a site in Drupal, you can contribute. And at the sprint tomorrow, we're going to have workshops and mentors there to help you get involved, and that will be true tomorrow as well. And so, o'clock on Saturday, I decided, what the heck, I'll come. So I went the next day to the sprint. I got some help, got my operating environment set up, and participated, worked on a task. I think that task is still unresolved 2 years later, but I felt like I was doing something. They pointed out on IRC, and so if you want to do this, now you've got to get on IRC. They have office hours twice a week where you can go and they have mentors online help you out and walk through tasks. So for the 2 weeks after camp, I went to do that. Probably weeks after camp, I was on IRC working with XJM, my mentor, going to re-roll a patch, and XJM is like, I can't, I gotta go, I gotta do something, and tweets a web chick. Will you help this guy? And I don't know, who knows web chick? Anybody? A lot of beginners here may not know web chick, but web chick has been in the community forever. She's been a real, I think, leader in the area of community, in the Drupal community. She was like the core committer for Drupal 7, right? And 8. So, yeah, I mean, my sense at the time was she was like the second person after Dries, right, in the community. And this is a community with millions of websites around the world. I've been involved for 2 weeks. I'm on trying to re-roll a patch. And WebChick is like spent half an hour while she was doing her laundry helping me re-roll a patch. And I remember thinking, it's like, oh God, now I can't quit. I gotta. It's like, I'm stuck. So, and here I am. About 6 months ago, I tweeted at her and I said, yeah, WebChick, 6 months or a year and a half ago, you helped me re-roll a patch, and I'm still around. And she said, we have to get together for coffee sometime. So we'll see if that happens. Other ways to get involved. So besides that, so there is all of that, and there'll be the opportunities tomorrow. Ask Kathy, ask Gray, ask a lot of people here. Go to the sprint tomorrow if you want to do that. But as we're running out of time, just a few other things. Do go to your local user group meetings. You can find them. A lot of them are listed in meetup.com. They're also oftentimes on groups.drupal.org. Beginners are usually welcome, and we're usually excited to have them there. They can vary. Sometimes you might come as a beginner, and there's going to be stuff that's way over your head. But if you stick it out and come back, you're going to see there'll be other stuff that's very helpful for you. Things like, I think one of the things that a lot of beginners don't understand is what you can do in the issues queue without actually being a coder, like actually fixing things. It's like simply reporting things. One of my mentors and my business colleague, David Needham, is always really stressing with me that, like, if I go into the, if I'm trying to install a module, something's broken, right, and I go look in the issues for that module, and I look to see if there's an answer there, right, what's going on. And sometimes if there isn't, then I'm right away off to the next thing. And he's like, well, did you report what your problem was? Because nobody else reported it, especially because nobody else reported it. That's why I should report it. I need to put a note in the issues queue saying, hey, I'm having problems with this. Now be patient when you do that. Don't expect that they're going to get back to you the next day or solve it. But at least you put it out there. I do that a lot, and sometimes 6 months later, somebody else is like, hey, I'm having the same issue. Did you fix that? Or something like that. Occasionally I'll get feedback from the module maintainer. Not always. But I don't do it with the expectation that I'm necessarily going to get a response, but I do it because it's important that we document that stuff, and because very often it will be valuable to somebody. If you come up with a workaround for whatever bug you're having, go back. Sometimes I post a question, sort of like, this isn't working, how do I fix it? I don't get a reply, keep researching it, I find a solution somewhere else, I go back and answer my own question, so that if somebody else comes to the issues queue looking for that thing, they've got an answer. And I oftentimes benefit from other people having done that. It's very frequently that I'm trying to solve a problem, I find somebody else has asked the problem, and then a day later they came back and answered it themselves.
Sometimes you find that it's your past self.
That has happened to me too.
Always help teach yourself.
So, help create and edit documentation. We are really running out of time, but this is, because I'm not a real hard coder, I often thought about this, like, how can I help with documentation? And it was, I wasn't really sure what to do. There's a particular, I've used the open layer several times to create maps with proximity searches, okay? And I found a great set of instructions that was very helpful to me, that described, it was sort of a recipe in a sense, how to use the open layers. Well, there's about 6 modules I had to use in order to get this particular result that I want. But I found a number of errors in it. And I wanted to fix it, but I was really intimidated by that at first, especially because the original author had written it like, I'm doing X, wrote it very personal. Like, here's my particular situation. I came up with the solution, described it, and made the whole thing, like I say, very personal. I felt like, well, if I go in and start editing this, my study is very different. There's things like that. It actually took me a while to realize, so what? Okay, I mean, it's not his instructions weren't working. Okay, and leaving them there because they were somehow the way he had it just wasn't helping anybody. It wasn't helping him. It wasn't helping me. And so once I dived in and started to sort of edit it, I realized, a lot of that stuff that he put in there about his particular use case really wasn't that relevant or important. I mean, it wasn't important to me. His instructions were, so I just started editing that stuff out. And I started figuring out how this document would be more useful to me. And I made those changes and came back 3 or 4 months later, reused them, and found out that some modules had been updated and they didn't work anymore. And now I had to update it again. And so I've sort of become the editor for this particular page in a way. When I want to do documentation, I started looking around for documentation on doing documentation. And I found that it was really hard. I was not finding clear, good guidelines on how to do this. There is, though, on Drupal.org, there is this documentation. If you click on that link, you get to the page, and there's a find out how you can help. And this was 6 months ago. I first ran into that frustration, and I've done a little bit to help myself, but I've noticed some of the leaders of the documentation team have also been working on it, and it's gotten better. It's still got a long ways to go, and providing feedback would help. As an example, I'm listed as an editor on the page about contributing to documentation. The things I did right away is I wasn't finding the answers to the questions I had. I just want to give this as kind of a quick case study. It's like, so there was an FAQ, it wasn't a very big FAQ, but I decided I'm going to answer these questions that I had, do documentation, and to make this more useful, what I was looking for when I found it. So that was one of the first things I did. I put that right up at the top, made it prominent. I would have wanted to find it. Came back a few months later, and it's back down here. That's how things work. I still think it should be up there. We'll probably, at this point, I'm not going to get an award, put it back and forth. Jennifer Hodgins, who is the person who edited it, what I need to do is pay an hire. Say, hey, this is why I did that, and have a conversation with her. So it's not something that would have occurred to me before. So this is about the website. There's a lot of other ways. I got contribute ideas and feedback to broader issues being discussed on Drupal.org. There is a group for documentation. There's a group for Drupal.org. There's a groups.drupal.org on the groups.drupal.org site. So you can go on them and find things like this. This is Drupal.org profile page. Feedback needed. When I saw this, there were only 2 comments. Now they've gotten more. I think it says it's today, and I want to say there were people now who've commented. But oftentimes you'll see folks on trying to improve Drupal.org looking for feedback on things, and sometimes they're not getting any feedback, and that's what they need. And we can all provide feedback on something like profile pages. Here's another example on the documentation group on Drupal.org. Community involvement stuff. There's people that you can talk about their involvement in the community. A lot of ways you can help like that. So, these are some challenges that I see forward. This is one that I think has been illustrated by the backdrop situation. Can we build things to everyone? I think that's one of the tensions in the community right now is that serving a really broad group of folks, and we're struggling to keep everybody happy. Maintaining community requires deliberate thought and work. I'm impressed by the fact that Drupal's put a lot of thought into building and maintaining community, more than I think maybe some other open source projects, but I still think there's a lot more work to be done there. Need better tools for building community. As I said, I think, not really groups.drupal.org. And at the Drupal conference, I went to the community summit, which was like a sprint on community issues, and I found a whole group of people who felt the same way, and we were talking about that, on it. Better tracking and recognizing contribution to the community. There's a lot of ways that we track and recognize and acknowledge contributors to code and to Drupal 8, but there's fewer of them in terms of how we recognize and acknowledge contributions to There's some that mentoring that I showed in the profile. One of the ways you can do that is by acknowledging your individual profiles. But like documentation, there's some. If I get a hit to core, that gets replicated on my profile. But if I change or update documentation, not usually. There is some place where it says you've edited documentation so many times, but I find that's pretty flaky and doesn't take everything into account. So those are just some of my thoughts. There was I'll leave that up if anybody wants. It's not much in it right now. I'll post a link to my slides in that. Haven't done it yet. But there are a few articles I found that were very helpful in preparing this presentation. Ray Fay did a series of articles on Drupal governance about 2 years ago that were really helpful to me in outlining a lot of how decisions are made formally in Drupal, and talking about some of the discussions that were going on at the time. So technically, I think done or not. So we should end. I'm happy to take questions until someone comes in, if any, or comments. Frankly, that's more likely. Go ahead. You have a question?